This video is a tricky one for me. It's going to be difficult not to contradict myself in my own arguments, and I'm essentially starting on an uphill battle because I'm arguing against points that I initially agreed with and supported. But for me, those initial points have now devolved into something I have quite a strong opinion against. That in itself is a little bit weird and makes all of this difficult to navigate. It is a sensitive area of conversation, but I don't care about that. I have an argument to share with you lot, and I'm going to attempt to do that whilst trying to be as authentic as possible to my own beliefs. At the beginning of March, Sarah Everard was murdered by a police officer. What happened next was a big social media outcry, which at first really highlighted the importance of a genuine issue. That being that the streets in this country are not a safe place for women in particular at night. I believe, based off the actual statistics and first-hand accounts from women in my life, that the point of it being genuinely more dangerous for women to walk at night as opposed to men can't reasonably be argued with. Now, this part is where my opinions get a little bit more controversial. I sympathise with the not all men response to the current movement, and I'm going to explain why. First of all, I do not think that a woman sharing her story about something awful that's happened to her by the hands of a man, for example, warrants a not all men reply. In that instance alone, it isn't being implied that it's all men. Talking negatively about one man does not in itself suggest that all men have the same characteristics. That's comparable to someone being run over by a stagecoach bus only for another bus driver to pull up and tell you that he's never ran anyone over. It simply isn't relevant. However, when we're referring to the current movement, what seems to be the ever-growing generalisation of men, and in some instances the inflation of statistics to give off an idea that something is a lot worse than it is. For example, painting something like catcalling, which makes a lot of women uncomfortable, and something such as assault, which is literally criminal, under the same brush. To me, that doesn't make a ton of sense, and this is where I feel that the not all men approach gains more justification for its use. Someone who is capable of or isn't going to be the same person who's reading through your Instagram stories, seeing your advice for men and how they can do better, and learning from it. A man who is even capable of considering to commit an act that is that barbaric is, in my opinion, already past the point of no return. And I feel like a lot of us, men and women, are aware of that. With that in mind, all that leaves is the men who aren't capable of something like that. The men who wouldn't even consider doing something like that. And they're reading your posts that are more often than not specifically aimed at men in general, and they may quite rightly start feeling attacked for something that will never apply to them. There's a very unhealthy rhetoric being pushed at the moment, which suggests that any man who says not all men is either hiding something or outing himself. In my opinion, that only adds foundation as to why some people think that not all men is a reasonable response. The baseless claim that you are probably guilty of some unforgivable act because you have an opposing view, sometimes just on how certain things are being worded, is only going to perpetuate a more defensive response from people who already believe that they are being targeted for nothing. On top of that, the notion that men who are completely innocent have a deep-rooted social responsibility to correct and educate their friends is, in my opinion, slightly misguided. A lot of these posts that are circulating aren't necessarily suggesting that everyone has a friend who's a racist. I think it's quite universally accepted that someone who is a racist shouldn't be educated but rather imprisoned. However, what I feel that some of the circulating posts do suggest, quite passive-aggressively, is that every man has a dodgy bastard in his friend group, which I don't believe is true. Don't get me wrong, if to you, men who make jokes about sensitive issues, including derogatory jokes about women or even jokes about rape, if that's an example of a dodgy man to you, then by your perception, you're probably onto something. A lot of men make jokes. But jokes are not something to be policed. They're not something to be corrected, and they're not something to be educated against. Because jokes are jokes. Making a joke is not comparable to committing an action. Making jokes about women with your friends, however subjectively offensive they may be, is not comparable to committing action against women. When I was reading the script of this video back to my friend for a female perspective on it, she brought up quite an interesting point to me. She said that all of the posts she's seeing are contributing to her feeling less safe, because in her words, she feels that women as a whole are going to appear weaker because of the perception that's being given out. She gave me an example of this, and it was making it so publicly that so many women carry keys in their hand as defence. That could symbolise to the deranged minority of men who are actually predators that women are, as a sex, far less capable than what was previously perceived before this movement. She thinks that I should write that potential point into this video in my own words as an argument. But obviously to many people, that argument will carry way less weight because it's coming from a man. The fact that argument points can mean more or less depending on who's saying the argument really shows just how far we are falling down the rabbit hole of shit as people. Closing statements. Stop fucking generalising people. No matter how much you think you're doing good or how much you're educating people, in the end, generalising innocent people will only diminish the important issues. And fucking God forbid you generalise people of the same race or people of the same sexuality, but you generalise men, straight, cis, white men. Oh, free for all, mate. Free for all. So I digress. Not all men.